I'm really excited to have Jeff Galak here with me today.
So I have my PhD from NYU, the Stern School of Business, in consumer psychology. I'm now a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, studying consumer behavior and human decision making.
Okay, so we're going to jump right in because I met Jeff through reading an article that he wrote on the Wall Street Journal about how his work in studying consumer behavior and positive psychology impacts travel. And I found it totally fascinating. So I invited him on my podcast and we had a great talk about exactly that. And I thought we had to have him here so I can talk to him a little bit about some of those trends, some new trends, and also let you all ask him some questions because his work is so relevant to what we all think about every day, which is how we get people out on the road having amazing experiences and how we can influence that. So Jeff, I'd love to have you start with just talking a little bit about the concept of positive psychology because not everybody is a geek like Eliza and I read a lot of psychology books.
Sure. So I think when you think of psychology, a lot of people think of clinical psychology. So you might go see a therapist or a psychoanalyst to help with whatever issues you might have. There's another side to psychology, which is baked in social psychology, and it's the idea of studying human behavior as it is. And within that is an area called positive psychology, which is trying to understand, well, what makes people happy? How do you have them have a good experience in life? What leads to well-being, being a positive in their lives? And so that's really where I am sitting. My goal is to understand why people make choices that they do and how those choices then influence their well-being and their satisfaction with consumption of products, with experiences like travel. And so that's the lens that I come from.
Okay, so let's start with some of the examples that got you intrigued with the idea of looking at travel and through this particular lens.
Sure. So for 15, 20 years now, I've been looking at how happiness changes over time. So the more you consume something, the more you experience something, unfortunately, as most of you will realize, enjoyment goes down, right? So the first bite of pizza, I always say, is delicious. The last bite is fine. Right? The first day on your vacation is probably amazing. It's a new, exciting experience. The last one might not be as great. We could talk about how to make that better. We'll get to that. And so I came from the lens of studying these ideas, generally speaking, for consumers. And then I love traveling, I think like most of you here. And I started traveling more with my family. I have 2 young children and trying to understand why are some of my vacations more enjoyable than others. And it wasn't really immediately clear to me. There's not a lot of research on this topic in psychology. And so I started thinking much more deeply about how can I apply the principles that I've studied out of this travel context to the context of having great, wonderful vacations and travel experiences.
And can you give us an example or two to start with?
Of a good experience or a bad one?
Well, of how how certain consumer behaviors impact that experience.
So one of the things I talked about in the article, and we've talked about as well, is this idea of doing less. Is that where you're thinking? Okay. Intuition tells us that if we're having an enjoyable experience, we should do more of that experience. So we could put it in the travel context. If you're the type of person that loves to sit on the beach and you're thinking about an upcoming vacation, the logical, intuitive planning schedule is to sit on the beach more. Right? Because that's the thing you've identified as your enjoyment. It could be whatever it is. I like hiking, you like the beach, it doesn't matter. The problem is if we apply what I just said a moment ago about enjoyable experiences decreasing enjoyment over time, too much time on the beach is a problem, right? After a while, you start being worried about all the things around you. It's a little too hot, it's a little too sandy and itchy. All the nuisances start creeping in because that peak enjoyment has declined. And so what I started thinking about is, well, how do you prolong that positive experience? Because there's a reason that going to the beach for you is enjoyable. Whatever that reason is, it doesn't actually matter. And so we started thinking about principles we can apply to heighten and prolong that enjoyment. And in this context, there's these 3 ideas. So there's the amount that you're consuming something is going to influence how much it declines and how quickly it declines in enjoyment. The variety of experiences that you're having will do the same, and the timing of those experiences. So let me unpack those. The more you sit on the beach, quantity, the faster that enjoyment of the beach experience will go down. That's super intuitive. There's nothing too surprising there. But the unintuitive recommendation is then we'll do less of the thing that is going to decrease in enjoyment going to the beach. which again, when you're travel planning is weird because you're trying to say, how do I give my customers or myself a positive experience? If anything, you give them what they want, and I'm trying to tell you, you can do less of it. None of it though, because what winds up happening is after that enjoyment decreases, there's a phenomenon called spontaneous recovery of enjoyment. So again, just going back to that pizza example, the first bite or slice of pizza is great. If you take a break and don't eat pizza for a couple of weeks, that first bite of the next pizza is again wonderful. And that is true of the beach as well. If you take a break from going to the beach by doing some other experience, you have this spontaneous recovery of enjoyment that then makes you enjoy it again. So in scheduling and planning, you might think about introducing stops from those positive experiences. They don't have to be extreme stops. I think an example I gave was, if you like going on the beach, that's great. Take an afternoon and enjoy some air conditioning inside as well. That will reset the decrease that you've experienced and allow you to re-enjoy that initial beach experience again. So that's quantity. Timing is delaying reconsumption. So the longer the break between consumption intervals, between going to the beach or taking that bite of pizza, whatever it might be, the greater is the reset of enjoyment. So just because you haven't consumed something for a while doesn't mean that it will return to its original level of enjoyment. You need more time for that to occur. And so delaying that is also useful. So again, in thinking about scheduling and planning, you might think about introducing other experiences that are longer to delay returning to that original experience. And then we can unpack all these even more, but the last one is the variety. So if you think about, and I'm sorry I keep coming back to pizza. I had pizza for dinner. I'm a New Yorker and I don't live in New York anymore, and I had pizza last night and it was delicious and it's top of mind. Pizza, interjecting another experience, like a food experience, if it's a calzone, that's different, but it's very much in the same spirit. If you introduce a different cuisine, introduce greater degrees of variety, that is faster to reset your initial enjoyment of the core experience we're talking about. So if coming back to the beach, if that's your focal experience you're trying to enjoy as long as you can, taking a break and going to get a massage is probably not going to do it for you because it's a very similar, leisurely, relaxing experience. Going on a strenuous hike, however, would absolutely do that for you. And so again, in thinking about sequencing and scheduling, you can think about introducing greater separation in terms of variety of whatever that middle experience is to get you back to enjoying the beach once again. So I think that's where you were going with the question, but happy to follow up on any of that.
Yeah, no, and another thing that you talked about, which I think is really interesting is, and this goes a little bit to the sense of variety, but also as people are planning their own trips, and I think this will interest everybody in this room because we curate places, we curate destinations and experiences for people. And you had some really interesting research about the types of people, how you can use curated research. I'd love to have you share that.
So I think we have to take one big step back and then we'll come back to this. You can think about the sources of utility that people get in life, in all things. So when I say utility, that's just like economic speak for happiness or joy or satisfaction. Most of us, this is true professionally and just as individuals, hyper-focus on what we call experienced utility. That's how enjoyable is the vacation, right? How enjoyable is the meal? How enjoyable is the thing that we're doing? And obviously that's very important because we want to make that a good experience for ourselves, for our clients. That's a tiny piece of the total utility that exists for you as a human. And so the other two pieces are anticipatory utility and then remembered utility. So anticipatory utility is the utility you get from thinking about the thing that's coming. So I'm guilty of this. I love planning. Like I'm an obsessive planner for travel. I get so much joy from looking at every hotel option, every trip, every event option that I can choose, anything that I can do. I get value from that. Not from the doing necessarily, but from the planning. And so I'll come back to remembered utility in a second because I know we're going to talk about that as well. But one of the downsides of this anticipatory utility is that in thinking about all those options that exist out there, I'm creating what are called counterfactuals in my brain. It's the other experiences that could have been. So when I go stay at a hotel, that's the experience that I'm having. If I know that there are many other hotel options out there that I've foregone, that I didn't actually stay at, and there's some negative experience that I have, I'm now immediately jumping to, oh, what a bad mistake I made. I should have stayed at that other place over there. Or if the event that I go to is less enjoyable than I would have expected, my immediate thought is, oh, I could have done all those other things that I had researched in advance. And the more I do that, the more I plan, even though I'm getting this anticipatory utility, like this value that I love from planning an experience, I'm creating the possibility of regret. And the more possibility of regret that I have, the more likely it is to actually affect your experienced utility, what you're actually getting out of it. And then I think what you were alluding to, Melissa, is this idea that there's also different kinds of people, right? So within this category, there's something called satisficers and maximizers. And the best example I have to describe what this is a personality difference, is if you're the kind of person that goes to a restaurant and you look at the menu and you read every single item on the menu and consider it carefully and then choose whatever your preference is, you're a maximizer. If you're like me and you look at a menu, the first item you see as you're reading down the list that is good enough, you choose it, you close the menu, you put it down, and you move on with your life. And what we know from psychology is that maximizers might make better choices, right? Because they went through every option that's out there. But what they have is lower life satisfaction because they're always thinking about the foregone options, right? You order the steak, it shows up, it's not cooked quite to your liking, and you're thinking, man, I should have gotten, the seafood dish. And the satisficer doesn't even realize that the seafood dish was an option. And so they're satisfied with what they have. And so in thinking about travel planning, it's this weird paradox. And I live with this as a human every day, where I say to myself, I really enjoy doing the research, not in restaurants, but in planning. I love finding out all the options, but I'm doing myself a disservice. And so my ideal version, if I can do it, and if I have a curation service, is somebody sends me a short curated list of options that I still get to think about and enjoy and ruminate in and thinking about what that might be like, but not so many options that the possibility of regret is basically infinite at that point. And so I think that winds up being a perfect ideal. Now, not everybody has that type of curation, but when you have it, I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I find that we already know in our jobs of curating for people, we see how happy the satisficers are, and we see how complicated it is to please the maximizers, no matter how good our job is. But you talked about the anticipatory pleasure and that utility, and I'd love to have you talk a little bit about ways in which you can balance the giving people the anticipatory pleasure, but maybe trying to curb their maximizer impulses.
Yeah, I think part of it is hard because maximizer satisficer is partly an innate personality dimension. So you are who you are. So you can't just change somebody, with an email. But what you can do is for the satisficers, they're not looking for every option. They want you to take the burden off of them to plan their trip. And if you could identify that that's the type of person you're dealing with, easy enough, right? There's not much left to do. You send them their itinerary. You tell them this is the trip. Send it to them whatever time in advance is appropriate, and they have all that time to sit and enjoy and think about the wonderful trip that's coming up. The maximizer wants more, right? But again, this is where I think the curation can be very beneficial, where you say, not here's 50 hotels that you can choose from in this one particular city. They might enjoy that experience because they want to compare, but then the chance that they're going to have a negative outcome in the actual trip, that goes up. So again, curating that list down and still giving them the agency to choose something is probably the best compromise you're going to get. But the reality is if you're the kind of person that has to have everything perfect, or at least anticipate everything to be perfect, it's very hard to get past that.
Yeah. Okay, so we're talking about human nature, and we know that as spending on travel increases, there's lots of reasons that people travel. And we always try to figure out, okay, what is the reason? What is it you're trying to achieve? Ideally, they know, and we can pull that out. Unfortunately, in the age of Instagram, more and more people aren't just focusing on what it is they want to get out of a vacation. They're comparing their vacation or their possible vacation to the perfect vacations they've seen their friends have. How do you think about that sort of comparative option?
It's very complicated. So at a core, humans are creatures of comparisons, right? So one of my favorite research findings, and this is not my finding, is if you ask people which of two universes they'd rather live in, one where you make less salary, but you're the highest paid employee at your company, or you make more salary, but you're one of the lowest paid employees at your company. Well, you should take the higher salary, right? That's a better lifestyle. No, most people avoid that. They want the lower salary at the highest tier within their organization, because for them, the comparison of their income to their peers is so much more salient than whatever the absolute amount of income that they're getting. There's a limit, of course, right? It's not an infinite difference, but within some reasonable margin, that's what you're finding. And I think it's the same for vacations. People aren't posting waiting 3 hours in line at Disneyland. They're posting the smiling children and the wonderful experience that they had, even though the reality of that experience is very different. So we're curating how we put our lives out there, and then we all want to compare to that, and it's very hard because what's out there on social media is not reality, right? It's a very thin slice of it. So when you're thinking about what is my experience, what should my experience be, it's completely unreasonable to compare it to the highly curated visuals that you see on social media. It's setting yourself up for failure because there's no vacation that will have 100% positive in it, right? There's always something that comes up. Nobody's posting that something on Instagram.
Yeah. And actually, you talked about remembered experiences. And if I think about a lot of my travel memories, I'll be honest with you, some of them are those things that you wouldn't necessarily post on Instagram. The disasters, my son not sleeping the first time I took him on a flight to Italy, or, embarrassing situations looking for a spa in Budapest. I came down the elevator from the Galak hotel and was in my bathrobe in the middle of a subway station. Not something I would repeat, but it is one of the most memorable sort of memories. And I'm curious how you find research looking at remembered experiences versus the actual moment of the experience happening.
So let's go back to that kind of 3 different types of utility, right? You've got the anticipatory utility we've talked about. That's kind of the planning. You have, and just to be clear, that lasts for like 6 months to 12 months, right? About how long people plan a vacation. The experience utility, which is a week or 2, and then remembered utility, which is the rest of your life. So we often neglect that one, even though I would argue it is by far the most important one for us to consider. So it's a wonderful question to say, well, how do we make that part of our experience positive? How do we make the memories positive? And one very weird and counterintuitive way is to have less positive experiences. And that comes for 2 reasons. One is what we already talked about, that's comparison. When we remember how good an experience was, it's in comparison to something else. There's no absolute amount of joy. Joy is a relative feeling. And so if you have a negative experience, like going down in your bathrobe, everything else by comparison is going to feel better. That's one. The other thing is about memory. So what we know from memory is that we tend to remember the most extreme and the most negative experiences in life. That's not true just of vacation, that's true in general. And so the reason you might remember that is it was an extreme experience. You're not doing that every day on your trips. And so that's going to stand out and it's going to burn into your brain. And I was actually walking over here from the hotel, I was thinking about this, like a negative experience that maybe I had that would stand out. And it was a trip I took last year with my family to Costa Rica, and our flight home, we get to the airport, canceled, right? It's just the worst. And there's no alternative flight. We're stuck for another day. Everybody's stressed out. And we wound up having a wonderful time, partly because that negativity it made anything positive amazing. And so we got a nice hotel. It was a little small, so we all had to cramp in, but it was fine. It had a nice pool. The kids really enjoyed it. And my wife sent me to the gym to get my stress out. And it wound up being a perfectly nice day, but it was a normal day. But it was wonderful in comparison to this very aversive experiences that many of us have had of a canceled or delayed flight. Now, we can't plan for a canceled flight. You're not going to bake that into your itinerary. But what you can do is bake in some slightly less positive experiences so that the actually positive ones really stand out. So what do I mean? My family now has a policy of taking public transit as much as we possibly can. It's got nothing to do with cost. We can take a taxi if we need to. It's got to do with the fact that it's a little bit harder, right? It's a little grittier to go on the local bus or the local subway in a new city that you've been, especially in a foreign country, where maybe you don't see the signage and you can't read the language that well. Why do we do that? It's a few things. One is we like to just immerse ourselves in the culture. That's wonderful. But part of it is because it's hard. And then when we get to our destination, we feel amazing because we've just overcome this challenge. It's not a huge challenge, right? But it's a challenge. And so we feel great. And so we try to bake in these slightly aversive experiences. Like I love hiking and my kids are little, so they can't quite do that much. But we try to push them because we know that even though they're going to be unhappy in the moment, when they're done with it, there's a positivity that comes with, the ice cream reward that they get at the end. Normally that ice cream might be mundane, but now it's amazing because they just overcame this obstacle. So I'm not suggesting you make a miserable vacation plan, but but baking in a little bit of adversity turns out to be really powerful, both in terms of that comparison and then thinking about what you remember. It's those negatives.
And I know you've done a fair amount of research on the role of things as triggering memory and objects. And I'd love to have you talk a little bit about that. We talk a lot in this industry about surprise and delight, and I happen to think souvenirs are a wonderful way to justify buying things. But no, they mean a lot more than that.
Yeah, I think that the eye roll suggests that people in the room don't believe that, and they should. They should believe it, because souvenirs are incredibly impactful. Again, think about the duration of each of those sources of utility. Right? Planning is 6 to 12 months. Experience is 1 to 2 weeks, and remembered is forever. Right? It's forever. One of the best ways to remind yourself of a positive experience, because we forget them, right? We all know this. We've been on plenty of trips, and you don't think about them on a daily basis because we have life to think about, is a souvenir. I think I mentioned this to you, but my wife and I had a policy very early on where we don't want to buy frivolous like tchotchkes that just take up shelf space. Like, that doesn't really serve our purpose. But we still want something. And so what we've decided is every trip we go on, we just buy a cheap little fridge magnet. That's it, like $10 or less, nothing special. But what it does is it lives very prominently in our home. And so whenever, now admittedly, our fridge is non-magnetic. It's one of those stainless steels that doesn't, but our dishwasher is, and we use that plenty. And so every time we load the dishes, maybe every time is an overstatement, but often enough, you notice those magnets and you're reminded of that wonderful trip you took to wherever it was. And that little bit of a reminder can be amazing, right? It can really spark that experience again for you. We go a step further, and we've talked about this, I think, as well. Every trip that we take, we create a photo book. Again, nothing fancy, nothing special, but every, 6 to 12 months, we'll sit down and we'll flip through these photo books, and it's like smiling ear to ear every single time because you're reliving these amazing experiences. Now, those memories are there. They're in your brain, but we don't activate them unless there's an external trigger to do so. And it could be as stupid as a magnet on your fridge or dishwasher, in my case, or as maybe more intricate as a photo book or whatever it is that's appropriate for you. That memory marker is very, very powerful, and you're almost reliving this positive experience over and over and over again. So I think you and I are on alignment here with souvenirs. Whatever works for you is fine. Magnets happen to work for my family, but those reminders are powerful.
Yeah, and you've talked about curation and timing, but spontaneity is something I think that's also, intuitively, we always try to encourage clients to have moments where they can discover outside of a controlled environment, and a lot of them are kind of control freaks. But can you talk a little bit about spontaneity?
Sure. Again, if you think about where does joy come from, it comes from the difference between what you're experiencing and what you expect. Right? If you get exactly what you're expecting, it's not that positive an experience. If you go above that, then all of a sudden that is special. When we plan a trip, if you know you're going to this museum, you create expectations of what that experience will be like, whatever art you're going to see or whatever cultural relics you're going to see, and it might live up to it and it might not, right? Whatever's going to happen. If there's an unexpected event that occurs, a spontaneous event, there is no expectation. It's at floor, right? There's absolutely nothing to compare to. So everything is positive, assuming it's a positive experience. So when you say baking in spontaneity, what you're actually taking advantage of is this differential between floor of expectations and what's realized. So again, simple things are, I really enjoy wandering through a new city with no plan and my phone off without maps on it. Now, I always, in the back of my head, have my phone in my pocket, so I know I'm not actually lost. But there's something wonderful about meandering aimlessly, and then you find a lovely coffee shop or a little boutique that you didn't plan on seeing, and that little bit of enjoyment is actually amplified because there was no expectation to start with. And so planning those unexpected experiences is hard, but it's wonderful.
But it even boils down to, we have a lot of clients who want to know exactly what they're doing, and we might put in, you're visiting this museum. They actually want to know what art is on what floor or what, and the more detail, in a sense, that we're giving them, the less we're setting them up for having a great experience. Whereas if we just say, trust us, you're going to love this game drive, or you're going to love this experience, and we're not telling you that you're also having breakfast in the bush, it's going to be that much better if you can do that.
Yeah, I think you have a very challenging problem, because I imagine these people are very time constrained and they want to make sure that they're using their time well. And I respect that entirely. I think we all have that. If they can let go of that and, like you said, trust you to plan it for them, I do think they'll have a much better experience.
And Jeff, have you looked at how to build consensus among people when they're planning a trip? I mean, we're working with customers. Sometimes they've got a family. Sometimes it's multiple groups of friends, and decision making can be a little bit complicated.
Yeah, it's a complicated question with an even more complicated answer, because there's no one size fits all solution. Different relationships, different units of people will have different ways of navigating that. I can imagine situations where there's a dominant individual in the family or in the travel group that gets what they get. And there's really not much you're going to do beyond that. Hopefully, most people have some more compromise in them. In that case, the simplest compromises, and this is coming from research on conflict management and kind of how you resolve these, is to think of things not as zero sum. It's not if I get something, then you don't. Right? And if you get something, then I don't. That's not a good way to negotiate. That's not a good way to solve problems. You want to find solutions that actually are beneficial to everybody and can raise everybody up. Easier said than done. Don't get me wrong. I'm very well aware of that. But when you start playing the game of, okay, you get Monday and then I get Tuesday, we've both lost, because on those opposite days, we're miserable. Yeah. So much better to find solutions where you can actually serve both individuals' purposes, even if it's not a perfect match for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of going back to pacing, sort of the idea of building anticipation for the trip, but also ending on a high note. Can you talk about the value of really figuring out those things and building and being very conscientious of that as you create something?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the most well-known findings in memory literature in psychology is what's called the peak end effect. So the summary of that is what we remember are the most extreme experiences and the final experiences, whatever that is. And so this can be as rudimentary, like the original research was memorize a list of words. And you say, well, what words do people remember? They remember the last word. It's not super surprising, but that's true for experiences as well. So when you're building a sequence of experiences, if what you're trying to maximize is remembered enjoyment, you have to maximize the memory. And so you put the most exciting, most positive experience at the end, because that's the one that's going to be most memorable, be it positive or negative. So if you end a trip on a bad experience, the whole trip is tainted, not because the rest of the days were bad, but because your memory is skewed to misremember and over-remember whatever the final thing happened to be. So very important that when you sequence something, the ending experience is unusually positive.
Yeah, and I know you've done research on gift giving. If we have a bad ending, can gifts solve it?
Oh gosh, we could talk for hours on gift giving. I don't think gifts can solve it. The short version on gifts, and this is a little off topic on travel, but that's fine. You can pull me back anytime, because I really could ramble on this one for hours. When we give gifts, so this is shifting gears just a little bit, when we're in the mindset of a giver, the thing that we're trying to do is make the recipient really, really happy for a moment. And it's that moment when they're unwrapping the gift or opening the package or whatever it might be. The problem is, and we've all lived this experience, that we have our receiver hat on when we're the people that are actually getting gifts. That's great. We all want to have a nice surprise. But then we're stuck with the gift. And so what receivers actually care about is how much utility, how much value that gift is going to provide them over time. But givers don't think about that. Givers just want something that's going to be shiny and flashy and in the moment makes you happy, even at the expense of long-term utility. So there's this weird disconnect between givers and receivers. And so I don't have a good connection back to travel on that one, but we could think about gift giving more generally.
Well, but I think we've talked about before, in a way, your gift, you're more likely to please someone with a gift if it's a surprise and it's not expected, right?
Got it. So yes, so surprises are great if they're done well. So again, a giver really wants to surprise somebody, so I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to get you, because if I do, somehow it's ruined the mystique of it, right? Somehow the romance is gone if I tell you what's going to happen. First of all, false. Just full stop. There's zero evidence to support that idea. Receivers do not care, right? The best thing you can do is give somebody something that they want. But we still want surprise. So you still want that in the background. So how do you do surprise? Timing. So if I give you a gift on your birthday, you expect a gift on your birthday. This comes back to expectations, which we talked about. If I have expectations, the gift that I receive will either meet or exceed or not exceed those expectations. But I have expectations and they're up here. If I give you a gift on a random Tuesday, you have no expectations. And so anything you receive is wonderful. So I can surprise you in terms of timing. One of the ways that my wife and I have implemented this, by the way, is we have a Google Doc. We're very low tech on this one. There's now apps that will solve all these problems for you. We have a Google Doc with a wish list. Just like, here are the things that are a little frivolous for us to buy, feel silly, but would be a nice gift to receive. So we know 100% what the other person's going to get us. But we don't know two things. We don't know when it's going to happen, and we don't know which of those items will be given at any particular giving occasion. This is amazing, because now I'm going to get exactly what I want, right? And I'm still going to get that element of surprise.
Yeah. And in our industry, in a sense, it's the idea, I hate to say, this makes everybody's job harder, but instead of giving the gift at turn down, which is when everybody expects their gift, show up at breakfast with it on a tray, and they're going to be surprised and appreciate it that much more.
100% agree with you. And again, expectations are so important, right? Again, it's about comparisons to others and to what we believe.
Yeah.
And so if you expect a turn down gift, like a chocolate or whatever it might be, and it comes, great. But if you don't expect it and it shows up, wow.
Yeah. So I would love, Jeff, if you would maybe sum up a couple of things that people could think about as they plan travel, as they think about travel, from what you know about psychology, and then I'd love to open it up to questions.
Sure. At a high level, I think that three-part framework that I talked about in terms of anticipatory, experience, and remember utility is essential. I think most of us, for ourselves, and I've never been a travel professional, so I can't speak to that, but I suspect this is true. Most of us are optimizing on the experience, right? We want those 7 to 14 days or whatever it is to be amazing for ourselves or for our clients, and that's wonderful. We should absolutely be doing that. But I think we're doing a disservice by not thinking about, A, how to optimize that in terms of thinking like reducing the amount of time you're doing something positive. That seems weird, but that actually will make a better experience. But we're also not thinking about how much utility, how much value people can get from those other two aspects, right? In terms of anticipating and ruminating on what's coming and remembering for the rest of their lives, or at least potentially remembering for the rest of their lives, what experience they went through. I think if we were to think more carefully and more holistically about that entire experience, we'd have better lives. I mean, I know that's a lofty statement, but I genuinely believe it. We'd certainly have better travel experiences, and I think the rest would follow.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask about?
Hi. So you talked a bit about sequential memories and how, based on how you form memories, you should put the most exciting part of a trip at the end. And I think something that we deal with as travel planners is sometimes you have the conversation of whether you need to have something more relaxing on the beginning or on the end based on who the client is. And so I was wondering if you had any research on the role that fatigue, for example, plays on creating a happy memory.
Sure. So we could put a little more bounds on ending on a positive. What that positive is going to depend on the person. And it's, I suppose, your job as the travel planner to understand your client's needs. Like I know myself, you need to know your client. If the client is coming off an insanely hard months of work and they need to just do nothing for a while, that might be the right experience to start on, but I would say that's not the experience for them to end on, because again, that's what they're expecting, right? That's the norm for them. So you want to make sure that that experience that they're ending on is positive for that person. Now, it could be that they just want to relax for a week and you're going to serve that need, but make the best massage the last one, right? The most immersive, most amazing experience. End on that note instead of starting on it. Does that make sense?
Do you have any books of your own or otherwise?
I do not. So I feel like I've been asked that before. The thing I think maybe good at is condensing. So I like writing for the Wall Street Journal. I like writing articles of that sort because I can get ideas out quickly. What I'm not good at is filling 250 pages with stuff that could be said in a page and a half.
Do you have any others you might recommend? If we
Oh, for
to
sure.
deeper?
If you're interested in this general area of like social psychology, some of the best books are Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, phenomenal book. Nudge by Dick Thaler is a phenomenal book. I'm partial to a book called Why We Buy by Paco Underhill. He's not an academic, we'll forgive him. But he did amazing work on understanding like the retail experience and why and how people interact with that. It's fascinating stuff. So those are probably the top ones that come to mind. Thank you for reminding me. So Danny Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, really, it's not my favorite read. Danny Kahneman's amazing, Nobel laureate, obviously brilliant human being. It's dense. Yeah.
I have a question over here. Obviously, a big part of research psychology is the dichotomy and the contrast between what we think, what we say, and then what we do, or how that makes us feel. And I'm curious if, especially in our role as advisors, if there are some questions or prompts or ways of opening up the conversation for our clients to reveal what their true priorities might be in terms of the utility that they're looking for or the kinds of experiences that they might want to have.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. One of the things we struggle with in this is in terms of researchers, right? Because we want to know what you think, but you're right. Not everybody's going to tell us an honest answer for a variety of reasons. So how do you get that out of people? I'm trying to think if this would apply well to this context, but one of the techniques that we use is asking what you think other people would want. So instead of saying, hey, Melissa, what do you want on your trip? I say, what do you think your friends would want out of this trip? And in doing so, you're releasing the person from having to lie to you. You're saying, well, I don't want to sit in a spa all day, but my friend wants to sit in the spa all day. That's probably what would be great. It's easier said than done, right? But that is a technique we use in social psychology to try to elicit people's preferences and beliefs when we know we're dealing with topics that they don't feel comfortable talking about honestly. And I wonder if something like that would be helpful.
Generalizing or depersonalizing the question.
Very much
Interesting.
so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, it was kind of just asked. I was going to ask you for some readings or studies. I've recently purchased The Laws of Human Nature. It's taken me a bit of time to try to get through the book because it's like this thick. But it would be great. Thanks for answering that. If we could get your list of recommended readings and studies, if it's not imposing.
No, not in the slightest. I admittedly have a list that's curated that I give my students on the same topic. And so I'm happy to pass that along. And if you could pass that, that'd be great.
That would be wonderful. And then just one other question. I don't think anyone has done it all or anyone has it all, but there is that perception at times. Any thoughts on balancing that as you look at the laws of human nature and ensuring that a level of gratitude, even for someone who is perceived to have it all and done it all, it resonates with them, and how to balance that and maybe relevant to travel in that capacity? So
just to understand the question, so the person who has it all, how do you please that person?
Yeah, it's a concept of they have it all, they've done it all, and how to reach that element of surprise and delight, I guess, in a way, with that kind of component of, I think there's a misconceived perception that a person might have, feeling they have it all or done it all. So maybe finding that level of gratitude becomes a little bit higher and some element of surprise. How to reach that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think scoping it is important. So the person who's done it all has definitely not done it all, right? Let's be clear. They may have done everything in a category that they're expecting that they're supposed to be doing. So I've been to every country in Europe. There's something you might want to check the box on. Okay, but have you considered going to Latin America or to Africa or somewhere else? It's a simple example. But there's things out of context that people must not be thinking about because they have a conception of what it means to do all the things. Then it becomes your job, I would think, to help them identify, well, here's a set of experiences you didn't even consider as relevant to you having done, checked all the boxes in this category. Why don't you consider those? I mean, I think that's where you'd have to go. Because somebody who says I've done it all is lying, right? That's just not true. Yeah.
Is there a way, and so we get used to it, and it's kind of like where people go vacation, we go to work, right? Do you have any pointers or any advice on how we can kind of rewire our brain to enjoy even those many business trips that are all for work, where we barely have time to do anything for ourselves?
So yes, I do actually, believe it or not.
Okay, awesome.
The research that I've done on like the timing, variety, and quantity, much of it was done before me. What my contribution was, and I think this is where it's relevant to your question, is making it clear that the reason that we have this decline in enjoyment. And the reason that that changes is very psychological. So the old way of thinking about, let's say food is the thing that's been studied forever, is look, I eat a bunch of food, it distends my stomach, it stretches, it changes my glucose level, it changes my blood pressure. Those signals are then fed up to your brain, and your brain says you don't need any more food. Like that's how psychology for a long time believed that satiation would occur, how decrease in desire and enjoyment. What I've done with others is say, no, it goes the other way, right? It's actually what you think that influences how much your enjoyment changes. And what does that mean in your context? You're gonna go on the plane for the 1,000th time this year. It's nothing I could do about that, right? That's your job. You can't change the quantity, you can't change the variety of experiences. That's just your experience that you have to have. But what we've shown is that actually what you think about in the moment that you're considering making a choice or how much you're enjoying something matters. I'll give you a specific example. If you're eating that pizza again, and all you're thinking about is the last time you ate pizza, too bad, you're not gonna enjoy it. But if you just take 30 seconds to think about all the other meals you've had that intervened those consumption experiences, your level of enjoyment of that pizza skyrockets. No change in actual experience, right? One of the reasons I like this is it's very hard to tell people, hey, do things differently. I can much easier say to you, hey, think things differently. So when you're on that plane and you're thinking about going on it for the 100th time, it doesn't serve you to say, God, this is the 100th flight of the year. What it serves you to say, well, what else have I been doing since that last flight? Let me think about all the different experiences that I've had. That will change your enjoyment, maybe not of the plane ride, but of the trip to wherever that you're going to. So, and I know that sounds extremely simple, and we have a ton of evidence to support that this works for most contexts. I haven't tested it exactly in what you're talking about, but I'd be very surprised if it didn't work there.
Jeff, would it work as well in a comparison sense? I mean, I think about what you're saying, and I think I get on a plane now, and I do think of all those months when we weren't allowed to get on planes. And every time I'm on a plane now, I do feel incredibly grateful that I get to be there. And does that work in a similar way?
Yes, but I would say not as well. So what our research has looked at is the difference in thinking about the experiences that have intervened, so literally been between the things we're talking about, or not, so way in the past, or potentially things you're anticipating in the future. The strongest benefit comes from thinking about the middle. That's not to say there's no benefit, and COVID is also weird, because life was just so fundamentally different. I would say we don't have good research to say if that particular thing would work better or not. But generally speaking, it's the intervening that's the most effective, and the rest are less, not effective, just less effective.
Hi. So everything you've said today has been very eye-opening, but what sort of resonates the most with me is the idea of the maximizers and the satisfiers, especially in my role where I discuss with members value add and play-by-play of their experiences and their expectations. So who is the person who opens the menu, to stay with the example, immediately goes looking for baked clams and tuna tartare, doesn't see it, decides they don't need an appetizer, or they may pick something else? Like, who is that person?
So they have very precise preferences going into an experience.
Right.
They tend to be more maximizers because that person has thought about all the possible options already. And they've said to themselves, I know what restaurants offer. We're not naive. We understand if we go to a French restaurant, the broad strokes of what that menu is going to look like. I know that I'm going to go in and I want escargot. And so, it's not on the menu. I want something, that's a problem for me. But that person's already considered all those options. So if you're going in with very precise preferences, much more likely that you're a maximizer.
Got it. Thank you.
Have you studied research on how helping others adds to enjoyment?
Yeah. So there, in the world of positive psychology, this is not my work, to be fair. So others have done this, looking at how basically being selfless, right? How helping translates back to well-being. And I'm very sorry to say that the most recent research on it suggests that it's almost ineffective. So there was a long run of research for about 20 years that suggested what you're saying, that the best positive value you can get is by helping others. It's not that it's a negative, but it's maybe this much positive. I know, I'm disappointed too, but like the data's the data. I can't do anything about it.
Wow.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jeff, so much. I don't see any other hands. I thank you for bringing some research to what we work with all the time, and I find utterly fascinating.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.